Hey guys, welcome to another video on SAP CPI adapters. In this video, I'm going to talk about FTP adapter, File Transfer Protocol Adapter. FTP adapter is most common and widely used adapter in SAP CPI. We use FTP adapter when you want to integrate SAP CPI with legacy applications or applications that support file-based communication. By using this adapter, you can integrate both SAP and non-SAP applications with legacy applications. By using this FTP adapter, you can achieve different scenarios like data integration, file-based processing, data migration, batch processing, data synchronization, enterprise application integration, and data backup and archiving scenarios in SAP CPI. By using this adapter, you can achieve the integration with FTP servers. We can use FTP adapter to connect to FTP server using different protocols. At the moment, it supports FTP and FTPS transfer protocol to send and receive a message from a FTP server. In an interview, you can get following questions around FTP adapter. For example, they might ask you what is FTP adapter and what are the key features of FTP adapter and what are the configuration steps that you need to follow to establish an FTP connection. And they might ask you what are the different processing modes in FTP adapter and what are the security considerations, what are different types of security modes we have in FTP adapter to connect to FTP server. They might also ask you to explain how do you monitor or troubleshoot FTP issues, and maybe they'll ask you about what are the best practices when using FTP adapter. And one important area is how do you process large files in FTP adapter, and maybe they'll ask you for the best practices that you followed for implementing FTP adapter integrations in SAP CPI. Another question might be around the explicit FTPS or implicit FTPS and what is the difference between these two and which one is preferable. So I will explain these two concepts in the configuration section, but these are the questions that you can expect in an interview around FTP adapter. FTP adapter supports both sender side and receiver side communication, which means you can send the files from a sender system and you can store a data in a receiver file system. Let's quickly talk about how to configure an FTP adapter both sender side and receiver side. Let's quickly look at the sender side configuration of FTP adapter. In the sender side FTP adapter, in the source section, you need to specify the directory. This is the directory on the FTP server from where you want SAP CPI to read the files from. Then you need to mention the file name. It's not mandatory. If you don't specify any file name, basically it will read all the files in the directory. In the file name, you can also mention some patterns. For example, you can mention file name dot star txt, file name star.csv. You can provide different patterns to read the files based on the patterns. There's a limitation of the file size. For example, if it is more than 100 characters, there's a limitation. If you want to know more about this, please refer to the official SAP documentation. In the connection parameters, you need to specify the address. Basically, address consists of the host name of the FTP server, then the port name. By default, for FTP connections, we use port 21, but for implicit FTPS connection, it might use port number 990. Then the proxy type. Basically, the proxy type specifies how do you want to have the connection routed. Do you want it via internet, or is the connection is only in the on-premise context? So I'll explain the encryption shortly, so wait for that. Then you have to provide the credential name. Basically, it is the user ID and password to which you can authenticate yourself with the FTP server, and the timeout. So how long you need to wait until the timeout happens. By default, it is 10,000 milliseconds. Then how many times you want to retry. So basically it is 3 times the default value. And the reconnect delay, for example, how long you want to wait for every reattempt. And there is an option to automatically disconnect it. For example, if you have a longer poll intervals, if the file is only expected only once in a day or once in a week, then you don't want to have the live connection for a longer period. So you can automatically disconnect once the transaction is done. Now let me explain the encryption modes. In FTP sender adapter, we have 3 different types of encryption modes. One is explicit FTPS, implicit FTPS, the third one is plain FTP no encryption. In real time, you never use plain FTP no encryption. At least in non-prod and production systems, we are not supposed to use this option because it's not secure. So there is a difference between explicit FTPS and implicit FTPS. Let me explain the differences between explicit FTPS and implicit FTPS. In explicit FTPS, what happens is SAP CPI makes the initial connection to FTP server by sending auth TLS command. With this command, this handshake happens between SAP CPI and FTP server. After that, the communication is encrypted. This connection usually goes via port 21. In implicit FTP case, what happens is the client, which is SAP CPI here, will connect to the server with a TLS connection, which means the client starts the handshake at the beginning of the communication. In the explicit case, you initially make a connection, then start the handshake. In the implicit case, you already start the handshake in the beginning. If somebody asks you, what is preferable? Is it explicit or implicit? I would say the explicit FTPS is more preferable because it's more dynamic. Because client is taking the responsibility of making a auth TLS command and getting the right credentials in terms of certificates, then establishing the authorization. So this is more preferable in the real world scenarios. But if you use legacy systems, I prefer implicit FTPS. It depends on the client requirement and customer landscape which FTPS you need to use. Let's now look at the processing parameters of sender adapter. In the processing parameters, the first parameter is read log strategy. In the read log strategy, we have 4 parameters: content change, done file expected, none, and rename. Let me explain what is the importance of this log. Read log strategy indicates the status of the file on the FTP server. For example, when CPI is trying to read the file from the FTP server, the CPI should know, is the file ready for the processing or it is being used by other process which is writing to the file. This flag read log strategy indicates the processing mechanism. For example, if you choose none, what happens is do not use read log, which means the file will be read immediately once it is available. Okay. In the second case, for example, if you select the content change, what happens is SAP CPI monitors something happened to the file. Somebody changed it, somebody appended some records or modified the content. If somebody gets modified on the file, it will immediately pick the file. Okay. Then the next strategy is done file expected. Basically what happens is when file is ready for processed, it will signal something called done file signal. With this signal, SAP CPI would know it is ready to be processed. And the last option is rename. In the rename case, what SAP CPI does is it renames the file before it is being processed. So remember, read log strategy indicates what is the status of the file on the FTP server. It is ready or it is being processed. Now, the sorting. Basically, when you read the files, multiple files from the same directory, SAP CPI should know, should it sort the files based on the file name, file size, or none, or timestamp. Based on these parameters, it will sort the files for processing. Okay. The next is maximum messages per the poll. How many messages it should retrieve in a single poll. Okay, basically it is 20 by default. You can increase, and I think it can go up to between 1 to 500, but the default value is 20. The log timeout indicates how long to wait before trying to process the file again in the event of a cloud integration outage. If you choose this option, change directory stepwise, what happens is SAP CPI would change the directory levels step by step. If you choose this option, include subdirectories, what SAP CPI does is it scans all the subdirectories in the given directory path. The last option is post-processing. Post-processing means what SAP CPI should do after it has processed the file. So we have many options here. You want to delete the file, or you want to keep the file and mark as processed in an idempotent repository, or you can also keep the file in process again, or you want to move the file to a different folder. You have 4 options like this. Let's now look at the scheduler. In the scheduler, you will specify SAP CPI. How do you want to schedule this adapter? You can schedule on a specific day, or you want to have a schedule on recurrence. Okay. In case of recurrence, you can schedule daily, weekly, or monthly. So based on your requirement, you need to select the right scheduler option here. And do you want to do this one time? Usually we do it every time. So we want to do it a repetitive way, daily, for example, 10 seconds between these timings, only in the morning or night time, or 24 hours. And you can also select the time zone. Is it Asia specific time zone or UTC? You can select the time zone based on the system and server availability. Okay. That's it. In the sender adapter, we configure the source settings and processing settings and scheduler settings. Let's move on to the receiver side adapter. In the receiver side adapter, you need to mention the directory to where you want to write the files to on the FTP server, and similarly you need to give file name, and you can also append a timestamp. It's a timestamp at which the files gets created on the FTP server. In the connection parameters, you have to specify the host name and the port, and similarly like in the sender we have the proxy type, is it internet or on-premise, and you can also set a dynamic parameter here based on the variable. In the encryption, we have the same options as we have in the sender adapter: explicit, implicit FTPS, and plain FTP no encryption. Additionally, we also have something called dynamic. Basically, you can also dynamically set the encryption mode based on the variable in the integration flow. In the credential name, the username and password to which you want to come to the FTP server, timeout and maximum reconnect items, and the reconnection delay, and automated disconnect option. So just like the sender adapter. The processing section, we have some additional flags here. Change the directories stepwise. We have the same thing in sender. So basically, to change the directory step by step, and if you select this option, create directories, it will create the directory if the directory doesn't exist on the FTP server. And flatten the file names. Basically, if you use this option, it will remove the directory path. It will create the file names in a single directory. And this prevent directory traversal, it is a very important flag. By default, it is set to true. What it does is basically with this option, you have an option to traverse to multiple directories in FTP server. To have a proper security, it should not be allowed, because if you try to traverse everything in the FTP server, you have access to all the folders. So to avoid this, it should be set to prevent, which is true here. And now let's look at the handling of existing files. Basically what happens is when SAP CPI tries to write a file to the FTP server, the receiver FTP server, if the file already exists with the same name, what it should do? So basically it should, do you want it to append the content to the same file, or do you want to fail silently without any error, or do you want to ignore the update, or do you want to overwrite the file? So these are the four options we have. And if you select this use temporary file, basically what it does is while processing of the file, FTP adapter on the receiver side creates a temporary file. Once the processing is done, it will actually rename it with the real name. So this is the flag that is used for. That's it. On the receiver side, we have the target and processing modes. Okay. In the interviews, as I suggested earlier, basically they might ask you about these modes. What is the difference between these two, and when do we use what? What is the preferable approach when it comes to file handling? And in the processing, you can ask, they might ask about these. What happens if you put append? What happens if you put ignore? And how do you handle the exceptions, and so on? These are the possible questions you might get in the interviews. That's it. It's all about FTP adapter in SAP CPI. Hope you learned something new in this video. If you learned something in this video, consider giving a like, share the video, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much for watching.